Hi everyone, and welcome back to yet another openMAINT webinar. My name is Grazian, and I'm a developer of the openMAINT project. It is once again also my pleasure to be talking to all of you about another one of openMAINT's features. As always, if during the webinar you have any kind of doubts or questions, or maybe something that is not particularly clear to you, please feel free to write your questions in the chat box, and at the end we'll make sure to answer as many as possible. Now that we've gotten the pleasantries out of the way, let's get into today's webinar and let's take a look back at openMAINT's roadmap and the previous webinars and also the future ones. So we started with our webinars back in April of last year. So it's been almost a year since the first one. And the first one was a general overview of the application with like a bit of a focus on the inventory module. Then last summer, we moved to the corrective maintenance process. And last fall, we discussed about the preventive maintenance process. And today we'll be talking about finance and logistics. We'll be discussing about how the data is organized inside the openMAINT application and also how we can configure everything in order to be able to use our finance and logistics module. Next, we'll be talking about energy and environment aspects, and then we'll finish up by talking about GIS and BIM tools. So this is the general overview for today's webinar. So we'll start by talking about the finance module. In the finance module, we'll be discussing about budget configuration. Then we'll talk about price list feature and also accounting movement. We'll then move on and discuss about invoice management and also contracts archive. And lastly, we'll be discussing about purchase orders management. Then we'll move on to the logistics module, and here we'll be talking about consumables registry and also warehouse movements. And lastly, we'll be talking about a couple of reports that allow us to get a better overview of all the information inside these different modules. So we can start by answering what I think is a pretty basic question in order to start talking about these modules, which is what is the purpose of the financial module? Well, I've got to say this, I think it's pretty straightforward because the financial module, of course, handles all things concerning money inside the openMAINT application. The application allows us to configure different budgets and maybe planned expenses, and also afterwards check how much money has been spent on which activities, and this way we can always have like a general overview of whether we are on budget or out of budget. The first thing we are going to be talking about is the budget configuration. Of course, the budget configuration has a three-level hierarchy configuration possible. The first one being the budget itself, which can be configured to be like generic across all my belongings or my company's belongings. So this way, everything that the company purchases will be attached to my generic budget. Or of course, I can go ahead and define a specific budget for each of my, let's say, sites or buildings. Of course, each budget has a starting date and an ending date. Then we can go ahead and have a deeper level of configuration by defining budget centers. What budget centers are? They are basically major categories that go ahead and define my upper level budget. Here we can have things like, for example, maintenance or security or similar things. And then we have the lowest level in our configuration, which is the budget item itself. This is the only level that actually has a planned amount in which I go ahead and specify how much money I intend on spending for specific activities. Given that this is the most specific one, of course, it is usually intended to be used for like very specific activities. So like, for example, we can have energy bills, gas bills, cleanings, maintenance, and similar things. Another even deeper level of repartition of the budget can be by configuring partition tables. Each partition table is linked to specific budget centers, and each one is made up by multiple rows. Each row is on the other hand, then linked to specific units that can be maybe apartments. To get a better idea of what these partition tables are, I think it could be useful to make like an example, which can be, for example, the property partition table. So let's say, for example, that a building has a certain amount of money planned to be spent on cleanings on a specific building. Of course, my building can be made up of multiple units or apartments. But if my units have different sizes, of course, each unit would require a different amount of money in order for it to get cleaned, because bigger units would require more money, and smaller ones, of course, it is only fair, would require less money. So by configuring partition tables, I am able to distribute the total amount between each unit. So this is one use case of the partition tables configuration. We can now move on, and now that we've got a better idea how to configure our budget, we have to know what we gotta do when we actually intend on spending the money. So for this reason, the openMAINT application has the price lists, which are basically catalogs of objects or labor things that teams and employees alike can then use in order to purchase new objects. So inside the openMAINT application, by default, there are two types of price lists, like I briefly mentioned a couple of seconds ago. We have the material price list, which is intended for objects, like for example, we have cables, monitors, printers, and other information like that. And also we have the labor price list, which describes what is the hourly labor fee for different activities. So for example, how much does it cost 1 hour of an electrician or plumber, and other information similar to that. Once we have our price list configured, we can go ahead and register accounting movements. So in order to register accounting movements, I can of course go ahead and choose from my price list, or I can either way insert manually if I don't have the exact thing that I'm looking for inside my price list. And there are two ways of registering accounting movements. The first one being from the maintenance processes. I can go ahead and use the specific widget, the accounting one, and I can, as you can see from the screenshot here, select one of the accounting movement that I want to register. And here I can either, as I said before, choose one element from my price list. This way I don't have to know the information like the price and other things similar, because the system would automatically know how much it costs since I'm choosing from my price list. Or I can go ahead and insert one directly by typing the description myself. Another way, of course, of registering accounting movements is by going to the accounting movement class itself, and by using the add card button, I can go ahead and register a new accounting movement. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, of course, our accounting movements are summed up, so they make the actual expenses that the company has spent during the fiscal year, let's say. So this way I can always know whether I'm on budget or out of budget. We then have the invoice management. Also here, there are two ways of registering invoices. The first one being by using a specifically programmed context menu. So what this does, it allows users to upload XML files of invoices directly inside the application. And of course, the other method is by directly going to the class, and by using the add card button, you are able to create and register a new invoice. Inside the invoice class, it is configured a scheduler rule on the due payment date attribute, which basically sends an email 1 month, 1 week, and 1 day prior to this date, so that whoever needs to actually pay the invoice does not forget about this important thing. We then have the contracts archive, where are stored all the contracts that are handled by our company. So here we have four different types actually of contracts that I by default manage inside the openMAINT. So we have the purchase agreement, which is intended for purchases. So the ownership actually goes from someone else to me or my company in this case. We then have the rent contracts, which are intended for like apartment rents and similar things. Then there is the service provision contract, which is intended for the provisioning of specific services. And then we have utility, which is meant to be used for things like energy or for example, gas utilities, water utilities, internet, and stuff like that. Also on the contracts, like it is done for the invoices, there is a scheduler rule defined inside the application, which as it is done for the invoices, it sends an email as a reminder to the person who is in charge of the operation that the contract is about to expire. By default, it is only configured though on the rent and utility classes. Okay, and now we are going to be talking about the purchase orders management. What this allows the users to do, it allows to create, of course, purchase orders that this way consumables are registered inside the application. So for example, I can go ahead and create a new purchase order, and to my order I can add different consumables of different quantity, of course, each one that I want to add inside a certain building or maybe a warehouse for later use, and these consumables can then be, of course, consumed by my employees or maybe my team. So now that we've seen like the theory behind everything, we can go ahead and take a look at a live demonstration. So I don't know if you see, yeah, you should be able to see right now. So here, as I said before, we have our budget. Here I configured a budget for the year 2022, which is our current year. Let's hope it's a good one. And of course, here I have my starting date and also my ending date. And underneath here, I can see all the budget centers that belong to my specific budget that I created. In this case, my budget is configured to be for the Tecnoteca headquarters. Here I have my budget center, which, as I said before, is like major categories, major areas that divide my budget. So for example, here I have maintenance, management, security, and cleaning. As you can see, the cleaning one has also a partition table configured, which we'll see in a bit. And then we have our budget items, which are more specific activities for which I have defined the plan of money that I plan on spending, of course. Another way of viewing my budget is by using the navigation menu here on the left. So here I have my complete hierarchy. So I start at the upper level from the budget itself. Here I see my budgets that are configured. And by going deeper into the levels, I have, of course, this is my budget, and here I will be able to see all my budget centers. And if I select a specific budget center, then I can, of course, view my budget items. As I said before, for one of the budget center, it is configured a partition table. So like my example from before, I picked the cleaning example because I think it's pretty straightforward and easy to understand. So if I go to my partition table classes, here I have my partition table, which is defined in this case as a unit of measure on thousands. I'm not sure whether this is maybe something that is more common in Italy and outside maybe it's not as common, but this maybe depends on the country where you're coming from. So as I was saying, here we have the partition table that I configured for the cleaning example. And as you can see, each row is connected to a specific unit in this case. As you can also see here, the value for each row, the sum of the value for each row goes ahead and sum up to be 1,000, which is exactly what I have configured on my partition table. Okay, so now we have price lists. Here you can see we have different types of price lists for example, electrical parts, plumbing parts, spare parts. And as I said before, each one is then defined by specific entries. So for example, here I have a couple of examples. So like maybe cables, electrician, Ethernet cables, and other things. Regarding the accounted movements, we have, of course, as I said before, we can go ahead and create and register new accounted movements directly from here. So for example, a material accounted movement, I can go ahead and fill in all the information. Or maybe the most useful way is by going to a preventive or corrective maintenance process. Here I have already an open one. And if I'm in the execution step, I can just go ahead and double click to edit my process. And by using the accounting widget, I can go ahead and register new accounting movements. So for example, here, if I click add row, I can of course pick my budget item that I want this specific movement to be connected to. So for example, I will choose repairs and management. Then I can go ahead and pick my price list, for example, electrical parts, and here I can go ahead and choose, let's say, a cable. I can specify the quantity. Maybe I'm going to be using 3 of them. I'm going to specify my VAT rate. And then I can see, of course, here at the bottom that the sum, the total amount is automatically calculated by the system. And if I want, I can also go ahead and add some maybe labor movements. Also here I can connect it to my budget item, for example, labor costs. And I can choose from my price list. I can set the value to be either manually, meaning I will put in a number like 1, 2, or 3, or I can specify from which time to which time, and then the system automatically calculates the time. So for example, let's say 2 hours. And of course, the total amount gets updated. When I save, my new movements are added to the application. So we also talked about invoices. So for example, here I can go ahead and add a new invoice by using the context menu, as I mentioned before. So if I click on the button at the center of the page and then go ahead and click import invoice, I can browse and look for my XML file. And when I click load, the invoice gets added to the system. So here we can see that a new invoice has been added. So these are all the informations. Okay. Also here we have the contracts class. Here we can see all the different types of classes that openMAINT by default handles. So we have, as seen before, the purchase agreement, the rent, service provision contract, and utility. I can of course go ahead and add a new contract just by clicking on the add card button. I can choose my customer, my type. So for example, electricity in this case, I can choose a supplier. And then I have to specify, of course, a description. So for example, I can choose a starting date and an expiration date if I want to, but that's not mandatory. And when I click save, a new contract gets added to the system. Of course, if I want, then I can add attachments. We then have the purchase management. So as I said before, I can add new purchases in order to acquire new consumables that my employees and teams can then go ahead and use. So for example, here I have an electrical stock up where I added a couple of batteries and Ethernet cables. So as you can see here, I have 100 batteries and 20 cables that I added to my system. Then this later on also, as we'll see, connects to the logistics module, which we'll see in just a bit. So these are the different classes that are present inside the financial module. We can go back now to the presentation. Okay. So as we've done for the financial module, we have to answer, of course, the same question to the logistics one. And what is the purpose of the logistics module? Well, also here, I think it's pretty straightforward. And its purpose is to handle all things concerning consumables. So how many are available, where they are located, how many have already been consumed or used by my employees, and other information similar to that. So this way I always have, let's say, a good idea of how many items I have available and where they are stored and how can I use them. I have to say the logistics module is much simpler than the finance one, since it is basically made up of just two entities. We have the consumables registry, which can be viewed as a mirror to the price list in the financial module. What it basically is a register of all the consumables that are inside my application. This way, of course, I can then use my catalog to choose from which consumables I want to order and how many of them. This way I already have information like price and other things similar. And then we have the warehouse movements. Of course, here also the warehouse movements, there are two ways of registering this type of movements. And they can be done both from the maintenance process or by directly going to the class itself. So here you can see from the screenshot we have a similar widget which is called warehouse, and here from the process itself I can go ahead and register new movements. There are basically three categories of movements, which are load, which of course means that I am adding consumables to my stock. So I am adding new consumables to my warehouses or buildings. I can also do this operation by linking my movement directly to a purchase order. Of course, this way it saves me a lot of time because all the information will be automatically filled in by copying the information that I have on my purchase order. Then we have the unload, which it's like the opposite of the load, of course, and I am removing consumables from stock. And then we have relocation, which basically means that I'm just moving items across my buildings or across my warehouses. As I said before, there are two ways of registering movements. We've seen the screenshot, so the first one being the widget from the maintenance process, and the second one, of course, by going directly to the warehouse movement class and adding a new card. Here too, we can go ahead and take a look at the live demo. So if we move to the logistics management folder, here we have the consumables, which, as I said before, it's basically like a catalog containing all the information of all the items that I'm handling. And then we have the warehouse movement, which is a list of all the movements that I've done concerning my consumables. Each movement is then made up by multiple rows. So this is very similar to the same logic that we have concerning purchase order, of course, because we have the main purchase order, which is made up by multiple rows. So also here we have one movement, which is made up by different row. And each row, of course, then is connected to a specific consumable. As I said during the presentation, we can go ahead and add movements directly from maintenance processes. So also here, if I go ahead and double click on one, and by using the warehouse widget, first of all, I can check stocks, which allows me to see if the consumable that I intend on using is already available. So if I click on the check stocks button, I have to choose a source. For example, in this case, let's pick Tecnoteca headquarters. And if I want to, let's say, use some batteries, I can go ahead and look for them. Here I see that I have available 97, but if I were to choose another item, so for example, neon lamp, maybe here I have 0 available, so I won't be able to actually use this information, use this item. But let's get back to picking the battery. Okay, I'm sure that I have one. And if I click on the add movement button, the date is automatically filled in. And then I have my source here. So I will pick Tecnoteca headquarters. And here I have a list then of my movement rows. So I can go ahead and add a new row. I can pick my consumable. So I'm choosing battery and quantity 2. When I click save, the new movement has been registered inside my system. Okay. Now, lastly, we have a brief overview of the reports as powerful recap tools. So the reports that are by default present inside openMAINT are concerning the financial module. We have the budget summary one, which is it is a single report, but it is actually as if 3 reports were merged into one. So we have the estimates one, which shows all the estimated amounts for a specific budget. We then have the actual budget summary, which shows how much money has been spent actually. So it does not consider the estimates, but the actual money spent. And then we have the comparison view. This way we see all the estimates and also all the actuals. And there's a third column here that shows the surplus, which is basically how much money is still left before finishing my estimated value. And if I were to configure partition tables also, there would be a fourth option where I can go ahead and see the estimates for specific units. Concerning the logistics module, then we have the consumable stocks report, which basically shows us an overview of all the consumables and how they are divided by buildings and warehouses, how many have been used, how many are still available, and other similar information. So with this, we have come to the end of today's webinar. I really want to thank you for the precious time that you've given me today. And here you can take a look at all our contacts. Here is our official website, then our link to enroll to our newsletter, our Twitter handle, then our official forum, and of course an email address for special inquiries. Thank you everyone once again for following us today, and be sure to check out our latest news and maybe tune in into the next webinars. Bye bye everyone.